Welcome to the Point. As we come to the end of the year and look ahead to 2021, we know there will be some changes. In fact, I suspect most of us are looking for a different kind of year. Some of those changes will be in the state legislature. We're introducing you to new members who will take office in January. Julie Rogers is a Democrat who will replace Democrat John Hoadley in the 60th District in Kalamazoo. She talked with us about her election and her priorities and outlook for 2021. Let me start by saying congratulations on your election, and that's where I'd really like to start this conversation, because the election was different than any, just like all of 2020. And this isn't the first time you've run for office. You certainly have run and won. You have experience in running in a district like this. So first of all, just give me your take of what it was like to run during a pandemic that changes the dynamics so much.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so thrilled and proud. Third time was the charm. It is my 7th election and my 3rd attempt at State House, and the perseverance paid off. I really appreciate my team. My campaign manager, Mariah, she really was innovative early on. And so, like you mentioned, pretty much we had to change everything to virtual because we were really going full steam ahead starting kind of in February, March, as the pandemic was kind of taking off. So she was very innovative. We put all our meetings online. I learned a lot about technology and Zoom and things like that. And then once things kind of calmed down, we made the decision to start going door to door. And really, going door to door is one of the more safe activities you can do because it's already distanced. So we made sure we did it in a special way, that we had no contact. We put literature on the doors. We stepped 6 feet back. We never touched anyone or got close to anyone. And I really do believe good old shoe leather, it is the tried and true way to campaign when you can. So I'm glad we had that opportunity closer to the primary in July. We hit the doors pretty heavy. And then, I thought the biggest part in the district, the 60th district, is quite Democratic. And so usually the biggest part of the race is the primary, but then we had additional challenges. And so continued to work full steam ahead through November, and the numbers were really decisive. So I was thrilled with the numbers and glad to be switching over to policy mode.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about policy, but just one more campaign question, because you just said something that I'm not sure everyone is, well, I'm sure not everyone is aware of: the physical importance in knocking on doors and talking to people face to face. In the state of Michigan, particularly, I think, for state house races particularly, that is just a given. And not only is it the way to connect with voters, but voters really expect that, don't they?
They really do. And that's been really my secret magic for the last several county commission campaigns. And we go door to door every year, whether there's an election or not. And I think folks really appreciate that. It's also one of the best ways to be able to listen to what their concerns are. I would definitely say it's a two-sided conversational rather than me talking at them. It's really great to be able to listen to what the concerns are on their mind, which overwhelmingly is COVID.
But let's talk about that. You're a healthcare worker. You talked to me early on about your concerns when it came to the pandemic response, because you were seeing some of your patients who were losing their healthcare, or didn't have healthcare, or were in danger of losing their healthcare. And that creates for a great deal of instability and obviously concern, not just for them as individuals, but you as a provider.
Absolutely. I think we need to really shore up Medicaid. I think as people lose their jobs, the legislature, the Republican legislature, had passed a couple years ago work requirements to receive those Medicaid benefits. And oftentimes, through no fault of their own in this environment, people are losing their jobs. So really making sure that we're caring for the person and healthcare is at the top of the list. I will say earlier this year, I was a lot more concerned with protective gear, PPE, the masks and gloves. And I think at least in Kalamazoo, our hospitals have done a really good job with supply chain. So that's not really so much my concern for right now. I think we have to keep close tabs on it. But really getting some federal dollars in. I've continued to advocate this past week for federal dollars for both local governments and state, as well as small businesses. And I continue to hear from a number of small business owners in Kalamazoo that are quite concerned and quite worried as we're nowhere near getting past this pandemic yet.
I should point out in full transparency that we're doing these a little bit in advance. The holidays don't always give the opportunity to have interviews right through that section. So we try to introduce our viewers, particularly every 2 years, to newly elected officials like yourself. So as we do this, both the federal legislature and the state legislature are still in session and may have had an opportunity to do something on these fronts. We don't know what will happen, but no matter if they have or if they haven't acted, there still will be a lot to be done in the first quarter of next year and the second quarter of next year, and likely right on through 2021, because the idea is when we get the pandemic under control, we still have an economy to get under control. So this is going to be the focus for not just 2021, but for years to come, I assume, right?
Absolutely. And, something I'm really looking forward to, I'm trying to be optimistic, but we have, every 2 years, the positive is we have some new players like myself coming to Lansing. And I've had the experience and pleasure of serving on the Michigan Association of Counties Board of Directors. And through that experience, it's been a mix of Republicans and Democrats. And we were able to work together in a very collegial, bipartisan way. And my good friend, Ken Borton, is also coming into the new legislature. And so he and I have already talked a little bit about how can we work together to advance good policy for the good of everybody and not get so bogged down in the D's and the R's that go after our names.
It will be an interesting makeup. I mean, the numbers remain the same, but as you say, you've got some new faces. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past, and it's not unusual, to get people elected from city or county government. And those bodies, while you all have your own political point of view, are largely considered nonpartisan. And just as an observer, I don't cover city and county government like I do state and federal government, but it seems like sometimes you can create coalitions there from people from two different perspectives somewhat easier than we see it done in Lansing. And when new legislators come in that have that local experience, sometimes that makes a real difference. Is that your anticipation as you move into this new position?
Yes, I'm hopeful. It's much more project-based, roads and bridges, for example, are, funding our county health department, making sure that we get supplies to the departments that are necessary. Looking at just this past county commission meeting, we agreed to send a letter to a company that has had some problems with the Morro Dam, and the Kalamazoo River is really slowing down and getting full of mud and sludge because of some of the changes in that dam. So again, that was an area where we could come together and send a letter that the majority of us agreed with, to encourage the company to really look at that watershed because of our concerns.
So now as we prepare for this new legislative session, and you will be going to Lansing. I know you've been going through orientation. What is the reality for you? I mean, it's one thing to run for office. It's one thing to consider to run for office. It's one thing to run for office in this remarkably different year. But now it's the reality. You go from campaign to governance, and governance is sometimes the really tough part. What do you want to do when you get on the ground? What's the first thing you want to start looking at?
Well, I think the governor just put forward a proposal, the $100 million COVID relief proposal. And so, I hope that we can, again, work together in a bipartisan way to try to craft something to help those that are the most vulnerable. So small businesses, people on the lower end of our income spectrum, and making sure that we also have comprehensive rollout of the vaccine. I know that our county health department is already partnering with the state and putting some plans in place, but then making sure those plans become reality and rolling out that vaccine to as many people as possible to slow the spread.
And of course, part of that protocol will be decided at other levels about where those vaccines go first. But one of the things we know is that many of them are going to be coming right from your backyard. I mean, this is really kind of a Michigan success story amid a very difficult time. I mean, what does that say about the ingenuity and the ability of a company like Pfizer to gear up and get something like this done in less than a year?
I'm really proud of them. I'm really proud of Kalamazoo and the region, and we have constantly been reinventing and recreating ourselves over the year over the last few decades with challenging economies. So I'm really proud that they were able to scale up, ramp up, really do all hands on deck. And then the other thing is that they've got such global notoriety and resources. So even though Kalamazoo is the hub, we also have areas on the East Coast, areas in other countries, and it's really a gem. It's really a crown jewel for us that they were able to, through all those changes from Upjohn to Pharmacia to Pfizer, to remain with their world headquarters in Kalamazoo and Portage.
Rogers is currently a Kalamazoo County Commissioner, and she'll be joined by a fellow commissioner in the State House in January. You'll meet her when we come back. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. There will be 110 members of the State House sworn in for next session. Many are returning representatives, but in our viewing area, at least 6 will be freshmen. Such is the case with Christine Morse, who will represent the 61st District in Kalamazoo County. Morse is a Democrat who replaced Republican Brant Iden and the only State House seat to flip in our area. Morse, like fellow freshman Julie Rogers, who was in the first segment of our program, is a Kalamazoo County Commissioner and will head to Lansing with a clear understanding of the impact the state can have on local government. First of all, congratulations. You came through the election cycle victorious, and I might add, we're one of those flip seats going from a Republican to a Democrat, which are so important, particularly important as it turns out, since there were some Democrats who were also flipped. So the majority in the House remains the same, but the makeup is different. And you and I were just talking before we began. I want to go back and talk about the election in a minute. But you were talking about the importance of what you're doing right now. We're recording these in advance for the holidays, and you're going through orientation where you get a chance to meet members, Republicans and Democrats, that you'll be serving with. And as somebody who's worked cooperatively in a group at the county level, how important is that to make those connections? Because we don't have the old practice where there weren't term limits and you had people that were there for 10 or 20 years and had really close associations. Now it's 6 and you're out. So getting to know people early, I suspect, is important.
Well, it's vital. And we really need to be making these relationships so that we can work together. And what I've already found, like you mentioned, we're going through a legislative orientation right now, is that we already have issues that we can all agree on, whether it's how we need some broadband infrastructure and better internet, or where many of us have flooding issues in our districts. We've already found common ground. And I think, even though this is all on Zoom, it really has given us an opportunity to get to know each other. And I think, everyone involved is really trying to create that opportunity and make sure that we have success. So, it makes me hopeful that we're already starting these relationships early on.
One of the things that you and your 109 other colleagues are going to be dealing with, regardless of what the legislature does before the first of the year, regardless of what the federal government does before the first of the year, you're going to have to be dealing with the COVID-19 response. You had to campaign during it. You've had to deal with it at the county level, but it's going to be an ongoing issue. So how do you approach that, understanding that for whatever reasons, in some cases, it has become a very political response?
Yeah, and that really truly is a shame, because it's a disservice to, the constituents, the people of the state of Michigan that we're trying to represent. I'm hoping that maybe a change at the top, at the national level, will usher in some change in terms of how people feel about responding to COVID. I really, truly hope that our legislature moves forward together as a bipartisan body to put some things in a place that we really need. There were 104 bills that were offered in this lame duck period, some of which do pertain to COVID, such as, water shutoffs, stopping water shutoffs during COVID, which when we need, these sanitary issues to be taken care of, that's just one vital, simple thing that it seems like should have bipartisan support. I understand that something like a mask mandate is very challenging because you have constituents that really don't don't believe in it. But, at the end of the day, if that is what is going to help us get through this, then that's what we should do.
The budget is going to be another front and center issue. I've talked to all of the candidates about this, and many of you, again, have worked on budgets. You know how difficult and challenging it is, because at the county level or at the township level or at the village level, putting budgets together is not easy, even when you have ample money and you may be looking at a big shortfall, maybe $1 billion, perhaps more, depending on what the federal government does. That's going to be a big challenge.
It is, Rick. And we have gone through that. It's been a difficult year in the county. We weathered it relatively well. And thank goodness the state was able to continue their revenue sharing, which was really vital for us here in Kalamazoo County. So, again, with everything, it's about having priorities. What things do we want to prioritize that we want to make sure are at the top of our, budget list, the things that we really need to be doing, investing in our students, providing them a quality education as required by the state constitution, making sure that we're responding to COVID and our, everybody related to the health industry has what they need to be able to respond, and go from there. It really is about, it's just like with our own personal, budgets at home. You got to prioritize the things where your money is going to have the best outcome for you.
I want to go to perhaps an unexpected outcome of this whole pandemic that you mentioned at the very top here. And I've seen it in every district that I've talked to. In other words, through every member I've talked to, they all to one degree or the other have identified the same thing that you identified, and that is broadband access. And a quick story, I live in not a particularly rural area, but it is not heavily populated. And there are a number of subdivisions not far from where I live that don't have access to broadband. And because of that, it makes their schooling choices limited and difficult. And it's something, we've heard a lot of talk about broadband over the years, but this may be the real demonstrative point that people say, oh, I get it. That's why everybody needs to be on an equal footing. What can the state do? What role can the state do in helping to spur that? Because it's a private industry, obviously.
Well, again, that is a budget issue too. I understand it as a private industry, but it's part of infrastructure. And if the government can collaborate with the private businesses that are doing that, to get broadband to all the places that just don't have it. It's really sort of crazy that this COVID and the response that people have had to have, whether it's working from home, going to school from home, has really just illustrated how difficult it is for people who don't have that at their disposal. And, let alone like farmers, people in agriculture who are out, doing a lot of work for the people of our state, but they don't have those resources either. So it really is about putting our private and public heads together and investing in infrastructure to solve that problem.
We talked earlier, and I know you are very focused on making sure that education funding remains up with the times, and I would think there are many people who have argued over the course of the years what the state of Michigan is spending on education isn't enough. Others argue that you have to do more with what you have. It'll be another battle this year, particularly if there's a shortfall. How far do you need to dig in to keep K through 12 education protected?
Well, we're going to have to dig deep. Because the fact is we've been underfunding education for 20 years. MSU did a study, I'm sure you've heard about it ad nauseum, that showed our reading growth was 50th in the country in 2019, as was our revenue growth. So we really just need to make education a spending priority. I understand that revenue is hard to come by. We've sort of put ourselves in the corner, I think, in this state in terms of revenue. But we really have to decide what our priorities are and how are we going to move our state forward in the times that we're in. And I think, if we don't invest in our students, then businesses aren't going to want to come here because we don't have the amenities that they're looking for their employees. So I think it all works together, So I really think just making it a priority and saying, this is our number one thing we need to move forward with as a state.
You said something that interests me there. I know what I heard, but I want you to explain it to me. You said we put ourselves in a corner from a revenue standpoint. What did you mean by that?
Well, we just, some of the tax structure we can't change without, constitutional movement. our corporate tax structure was changed in 2011. And I actually just learned in my legislative conference that we're spending $500 million a year for tax credits. We're losing that, So really, the money that it shows that we're bringing in for corporate and business taxes, we're really not. So I don't know. I just would like to take a look at what the options are for how we could, make some changes to our taxing, system that aren't necessarily constitutionally mandated.
I wonder about this entire class of new members of the State House of Representatives. When most of you decided to run, COVID was not the main issue, probably, because you make those decisions more than a few months out, generally speaking. But you've had to focus on that almost entirely. We've talked about some other things you would be interested in. But if, and I'm not pretending this is going to be the case, but if you didn't have to focus so much of your time on COVID, which you will, if you didn't have to focus so much time on your budget, which you will, if you didn't have to focus so much time on making sure and helping get the vaccine distributed, which you will, what are some of the other things when you first started to think about this that you really wanted to take on and be an advocate for?
Well, one of the top things is I am a breast cancer survivor, as we've discussed in the past. We do know that the Affordable Care Act is in question at the Supreme Court. The only thing that requires coverage for pre-existing conditions is the Affordable Care Act. So if the Supreme Court does overrule the Affordable Care Act, I believe as a state we should move forward with requiring insurance companies to coverage pre-existing conditions as the ACA did. So that's one issue, because a lot of people are concerned about that. Healthcare was one of my original issues, and it continued all the way through. Obviously, with a pandemic, it's going to continue, but there's so many related things. People are losing their jobs, therefore they're losing their health insurance. There's just a lot that healthcare is wrapped up. We need healthcare, to live. And so our system in the US is just, it's not fair and it's not equitable at all. One of the other issues that was of big concern here in my county commission district, as well as my representative district, is that we've had flooding here in Southwest Michigan for 3 years. The groundwater has been really high, and in particular, it's affected 2 lakes that are bowls. But it really just highlights the fact that we don't have systems in place to help our citizens. I mean, the township has worked just so hard with the citizens to find solutions. And I know the governor had proposed $40 million to help people with the impacts of climate change, as well as started something called Catalyst Communities to help our local governments prep for, climate emergencies and climate change. But we really do need to try to be proactive and put things into place, because here we're already living with it here in Southwest Michigan, but we really just need to put some systems in place so we can help people.
Despite the election and a number of new members heading to the House in 2021, the political makeup remains numerically the same as it has been for the last 2 years, with Republicans in control of the chamber, likewise in the Senate. When we come back, what that means for governance in Lansing next. To the point. For the last 2 years, we've seen what divided government looks like in Lansing. Not unlike the last time we had a Democratic governor and Republican legislature, this time around there has been plenty of conflict and more than a little animosity. It's been exacerbated by a pandemic that has left us all wondering exactly how to respond, and it would appear that will all continue in 2021 as the legislature and governor will have to deal with both the pandemic and a predicted big budget shortfall. Both will require some bipartisan cooperation. That's been hard to find in the state capitol in the last 2 years. We'll see you next week. To the point.